You learn pretty quick in my line of work that the most dangerous secrets aren't the ones people keep from the world, they're the ones they keep from themselves. They build entire lives on foundations of sand, then act surprised when the tide comes in and washes it all away. I've seen it 1,000 times. But every now and then, a story walks onto my stage that reminds you just how high the stakes can get. This was one of those times. It started, as it so often does, with a phone call from a producer. The file landed on my desk with a label that was deceptively simple: marital deceit. That's like calling the Grand Canyon a hole in the ground. When I first met Sarah and Mark backstage, the air was thick. You could have cut the tension with a knife. Mark was a big guy, a contractor, hands like leather, but his eyes were filled with a kind of bewildered hurt. He looked like a man who'd been navigating by a map only to be told the landscape had changed years ago and no one bothered to inform him. He was here because he believed Sarah was cheating on him. Again, that was the presenting problem. He'd found text, seen her pulling away, and the old wounds, the ones from early in their marriage, were ripped wide open. He was convinced she had a secret, a big one, and he was determined to get it out of her on my stage. He was looking for an affair, a secret bank account, something he could understand, something he could fight. What he was about to find was something that would challenge the very definition of who he was. Sarah, on the other hand, was a fortress. She was quiet, her body language coiled tight like a spring. She sat with her arms crossed, a shield against the world, against her husband, and most certainly against me. Her story was that Mark was paranoid, controlling, that his past insecurities were poisoning their present. She painted a picture of a man obsessed, unable to let go of a mistake she'd made nearly a decade ago. On paper, you might have sided with her. You might have seen a woman being worn down by a suspicious husband. But I've learned to read the silence, to listen to what's not being said. And her silence was deafening. There was a secret there. All right? I knew it. She knew it. But the secret she was keeping was so much bigger, so much more catastrophic than the one Mark was hunting for. He was digging for a weed, and she was sitting on a landmine. The central issue, the reason this case has stuck with me for so long wasn't just the lie itself, it was the child, their son, Leo. He was 7 years old. From everything I'd read, everything they'd told my staff, Leo was Mark's entire world. Mark coached his little league team, taught him how to fish, read to him every single night. The photos they showed us were a testament to that bond, a father and a son who were, by all accounts, inseparable. This boy was the son in Mark's universe. And as I sat there, looking at this broken couple, I had a sinking feeling that the truth Sarah was hiding was about to cause a solar eclipse. My job isn't to play gotcha. It's to get to the truth, because you can't fix a problem until you acknowledge what it is. I knew I couldn't just charge in. Sarah's defenses were too high. She had spent 7 years fortifying her reality, telling herself a story that allowed her to get up every morning and function. My task was to create an environment where the truth was a safer place to be than the lie. That's a tall order when the lie is the only thing holding your world and your husband's world together. The truth, in this case, wasn't going to set her free. It was going to be a detonation. And we were all sitting in the blast radius. I had to understand how they got here. Not just the affair, but the years of silence that followed. A lie of that magnitude doesn't exist in a vacuum. It grows in a specific kind of soil, a mixture of fear, shame, and a profound breakdown in the marital ecosystem. To understand the why, you have to go back. You have to peel back the layers of resentment and fear and look at the foundation of the marriage itself. When I started asking them about the beginning, a different picture emerged. They married young. Mark was driven, working 60, 70 hours a week, trying to get his contracting business off the ground. He was providing, putting a roof over their heads, food on the table. In his mind, he was doing exactly what a husband and a man is supposed to do. His currency of love was sweat equity. He was building their future, brick by brick. The problem is, while he was out laying bricks, the emotional foundation of his own home was cracking. Sarah described a loneliness that was profound. She wasn't just alone in the house, she felt alone in the marriage. She'd try to talk to him, to connect, and he'd be exhausted, distracted, his mind still at a job site. He wasn't being malicious, he was just absent, and in that absence, a void opened up. People don't like voids. We are compelled to fill them. For Sarah, the void was filled with the feeling of being invisible, of being a housekeeper and a partner in name only. Her emotional bank account was overdrawn. She felt unseen, unheard, and unvalued. Now, let's be clear. Does that excuse what happened next? Absolutely not. But it does explain it. The affair wasn't some grand, passionate romance. It was a symptom of a dying marriage. It was with a man from her office who paid attention to her. He asked about her day. He laughed at her jokes. He told her she was pretty. Simple things. The kind of emotional currency Mark had stopped dealing in, it was a brief, sordid, and ultimately meaningless encounter that lasted only a few weeks. It was a mistake born of desperation, a dysfunctional attempt to feel something, to feel seen. The payoff for her in that moment was validation. And when you're starving, you'll eat whatever is put in front of you, even if it's poison. Then came the pregnancy test. 2 pink lines. And in that moment, her world tilted on its axis. The affair was over. The guilt was already eating at her. And now this. I asked her what she was thinking in that moment. She said it was just sheer, cold panic. A cascade of catastrophic thoughts. Mark would leave her. Her family would disown her. She'd be a single mother. Her life, as she knew it, was over. But then another thought crept in. A sliver of hope that was also a path to a deeper deception. The timing was close. It was possible, just barely, that the baby was Mark's. And that possibility became her lifeline. She clung to it. She made a choice, not with a grand evil design, but out of pure, unadulterated fear. She decided to say nothing, to wait, to hope. She told herself it was Mark's. She repeated it until she almost believed it. This wasn't a lie she told Mark once. It was a lie she told herself 1,000 times a day. Every time she felt a kick, every doctor's appointment, every time Mark would touch her belly with a look of absolute wonder on his face. The birth of Leo was the moment the lie was sealed in concrete. The second Mark held that child, he was transformed. This tired, distracted man who had been emotionally absent for years was suddenly present in a way Sarah had never seen. The love that poured out of him for that baby boy was tidal. It was fierce and unconditional and total. He was a natural father. And for Sarah, watching him, it was both a beautiful and a terrifying thing to behold. It was beautiful because she saw the man she fell in love with again. But it was terrifying because she knew deep down that this perfect love was built on a lie. Every time Mark said, "He has my eyes," or "He's got my stubborn streak," it was another twist of the knife in her own gut. Mark's joy became her prison. How could she ever tell him the truth? How could she take this joy away from him? The secret was no longer just about protecting herself. She convinced herself it was about protecting him and protecting this perfect little family she had inadvertently created. For 7 years, she lived on that knife's edge. The secret shaped every interaction. It created an emotional chasm between them that Mark could feel but couldn't identify. He just knew his wife was distant, she was holding something back. He felt the disconnect, and he logically concluded it must be what happened before, another man. His accusations of cheating were his fumbling attempts to give a name to the ghost in his marriage. He was right that there was a betrayal. He was just wrong about what it was. Sarah, in turn, would react to his accusations with defensive anger because it was easier to fight about a lie than to confess the truth. Their entire marital dynamic became a dance around this black hole, this massive, unspeakable thing at the center of their lives, and it was slowly pulling everything into it. The thing about a secret like the one Sarah was keeping is that it requires constant energy to maintain. It's like holding a beach ball underwater. For a while, you can do it, but your muscles start to burn, you get tired, and sooner or later, that ball is going to fly up out of the water with explosive force. For 7 years, Sarah had been holding that ball down. But recently, she'd started to get tired. The guilt, the constant fear of exposure was wearing her down. Her behavior changed. She became more withdrawn, more anxious. She'd spend hours on the computer after Mark went to bed, not looking up other men, but falling down rabbit holes of articles about paternity, about child psychology, about the long-term effects of family secrets. She was torturing herself with information, trying to find a solution that didn't exist. Of course, Mark didn't see any of that. What he saw was a wife who was secretive with her phone, who jumped when he walked into a room, who cleared her browser history. He saw the exact same patterns he'd seen years ago. So his mind did what minds do. It connected the dots with the only crayon it had. For him, the answer was obvious. She was cheating again. The escalation began in earnest about 6 months before they came to see me. It started with small jabs, sarcastic comments. Then it grew into full-blown accusations. They were living in a war zone, and every conversation was a potential minefield. I've sat through tapes of their home arguments. It was a master class in dysfunctional communication. He would come at her with an accusation. Who are you texting? Why did you delete the call log? And she couldn't give him the real answer. She couldn't say, I was reading about a man I slept with 8 years ago and panicking about whether our son is his. So she would deflect. She'd get angry. She'd turn it back on him. Why are you so controlling? Why can't you ever trust me? This is about your insecurity, not my behavior. It's a classic strategy. When you can't win an argument on the facts, you attack the person. It worked in a way. It would end the immediate confrontation, but it only deepened his suspicion and her isolation. They were in a feedback loop from hell. His accusations made her more secretive, and her secrecy confirmed his accusations. And all the while, their son Leo was living in the fallout. Kids are smart. They're like emotional Geiger counters. They might not understand the words, but they feel the radiation of conflict. They told me Leo had started having trouble at school. He was more anxious, acting out. He was internalizing the tension that was poisoning his home. This boy was the one true innocent victim in all of this, a child caught in a crossfire of a war he didn't even know was being fought. That, for me, is always the inflection point. When the dysfunction starts to damage a child, the time for games is over. The decision to write to the show was Mark's. It was a Hail Mary pass. He told my producers he felt like he was going crazy. He knew something was wrong, deeply wrong, but he couldn't prove it. He figured if he got Sarah on my stage, under the lights, in front of millions of people, the truth would have nowhere to hide. He thought he was coming for a lie detector test about an affair. For Sarah, agreeing to come was the ultimate gamble. Part of her, I think, was just exhausted from holding the beach ball underwater. Another part thought she could outsmart the situation. She figured she could come on, pass the lie detector test about a current affair, which she would, and in doing so, discredit Mark's paranoia once and for all. She was trying to solve the wrong problem. She thought she could put a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. By the time they sat down with me backstage, they were two of the most emotionally exhausted people I had ever seen. The fight had gone out of them. They were just done. And they had finally arrived at a place where the truth, no matter how catastrophic, might be less painful than the life they were living. When we finally walked out onto that stage, the atmosphere was electric. You have to understand, for the audience, this was a story about infidelity. They were there to see if the wife was cheating. They had their signs. They had their opinions. They thought they knew what the stakes were. They had no idea. I started with Mark. I let him lay out his case. He was earnest, pained. He listed the evidence, the secretive phone calls, the late-night computer sessions, the emotional distance. To anyone listening, it sounded like a classic case of an affair. He was making a logical, albeit painful, argument based on the data he had. He said, "Dr. Phil, I love my wife and I love my son more than life itself, but I can't live like this. I feel like a stranger in my own home. I just need to know the truth, whatever it is." You could feel the audience sympathize with him. He was the wronged husband, the victim. Then I turned to Sarah. She sat there, ramrod straight, a marble statue of defiance. I asked her point blank, "Sarah, are you currently having an affair?" She looked right at me, didn't flinch, and said, "No, I am not." And I knew from the pre-show polygraph we had done that she was telling the truth. I announced the results. According to the polygraph examiner, Sarah is being truthful. She is not having an affair. A wave of confusion washed over the audience, and over Mark. He slumped in his chair, his face a mask of disbelief and frustration. His entire theory of the case had just been blown to pieces. If she wasn't cheating, then what was going on? Was he crazy? Was he the paranoid, controlling monster she'd been painting him as? This was a critical moment. I had just taken away his narrative. I had disarmed him, and I did it on purpose, because now he wasn't the angry, accusatory husband anymore. He was just a lost and confused man. This created a space, a small opening for a different kind of truth to emerge. I turned back to Sarah. Her victory was short-lived. I could see the relief in her eyes, but also a flicker of fear. She had won the battle, but she knew the war wasn't over. I softened my tone. I didn't come at her with an accusation. I came at her with an observation. "Sarah," I said, "I believe you. I believe you're not having an affair, but I also believe Mark when he says you are distant, that you are secretive, that you are keeping something from him. He is right about the what, he's just wrong about the who and the when. There is a secret in this marriage, isn't there? A big one." That's when the first crack appeared in her armor. Her eyes welled up, her chin started to tremble. She just gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. I kept my voice calm and steady. "Mark isn't crazy, is he? He's picking up on the guilt and the fear that you live with every single day. He can feel the lie, even if he doesn't know what it is." She started to cry then, silent tears tracking down her face. All the energy she had used for 7 years to hold that beach ball underwater was gone. Mark was watching this, utterly bewildered. He saw her tears, her admission that there was a secret, and his mind was racing, trying to put the pieces together. I could see him thinking, so there was someone else, just not now? When? Who was it? I looked at Sarah. "This isn't about an affair you're having now, is it? This goes back a long time. It goes back to the beginning. She was sobbing now, unable to speak, just nodding. I knew I had to be the one to guide her through this. Sarah, I said, my voice as gentle as I could make it, the secret you are keeping. It's about Leo, isn't it? And that was the moment. The sound that came out of her was a gut-wrenching sob of utter despair and release. It was the sound of a dam breaking. The audience went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Mark's head snapped up. He looked from her to me, his face a canvas of pure, unadulterated confusion. Leo, he mouthed, the sound not even coming out. What about Leo? Sarah looked at her husband, her eyes pleading for an impossible forgiveness. And through her tears, she finally said the words she had held inside for 7 years, the words she never planned to say out loud. He's not yours, Mark. Leo, he's not your son. The detonation had occurred. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard in my life. It was the sound of a man's world being vaporized. Mark just stared at her. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He just shattered. He physically recoiled in his chair as if he'd been struck. The color drained from his face. His entire identity, husband, provider, and most importantly, father, had been built on a lie, and the foundation had just been turned to dust. The hunt for an affair seemed like a childish game now. The truth was a monster he could never have imagined. And we were all there on national television to watch it devour him. The air in the studio was suddenly thin, heavy, and utterly still. Mark's face was a study in pure, unadulterated shock. His jaw hung open, his eyes wide and vacant, staring straight ahead as if he were looking at a ghost. His hands, which had been resting on his knees, slowly curled into fist, white-knuckled and trembling. It wasn't anger yet. It was something far more primal, the utter incapacitation that comes when your entire reality collapses. He looked like he'd been hit by a truck, then told the truck was his own house. Sarah, on the other hand, was a crumpled mess. The words were out, the secret finally released, and with it a torrent of grief, guilt, and, paradoxically, a tiny sliver of relief. She was weeping uncontrollably, her body racked with sobs. She kept murmuring, "I'm so sorry, Mark, I'm so sorry." But the words were lost on him. He was no longer looking at her. He was looking at something invisible, something only he could see, a phantom image of his son, a son he now knew might not be his at all. I let the silence hang there for a moment. You can't rush these things. When a bomb goes off, you have to let the dust settle before you can even begin to assess the damage. My job in that moment wasn't to throw more fuel on the fire, but to ground them, to guide them through the immediate aftermath of this seismic revelation. I looked at Mark. His eyes were still glazed over, but there was a flicker of something new starting to ignite behind them, a simmering rage. "Mark," I said, my voice cutting through Sarah's sobs, firm but empathetic, "this is a lot to take in, I know that, but we have to talk about it, we have to understand it." He finally turned his head, slowly, towards Sarah, his eyes narrowing. What did you say?" His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. He wanted to hear it again, to confirm that he hadn't misheard, that this wasn't some horrible nightmare. Sarah lifted her tear-streaked face. He's not genetically yours, Mark. I'm so sorry." The words were a fresh wound, twisting the knife, and then it hit him. The shock began to recede, replaced by a volcanic eruption of pain and betrayal. Not my son Leo? You're telling me that my Leo is not mine? He stood up then, his chair scraping back loudly, his big frame trembling. He wasn't yelling, but his voice was tight with a barely contained fury. Everything was a lie. Every single hug, every I love you, Daddy, every baseball game, every damn night I tucked him in. He was pacing now, a caged animal running his hands through his hair. You let me believe he was mine. For 7 years, you watched me love him. You watched me be a father to him. You watched me devote my entire life to him, and you just let me do it knowing it was all a lie? The questions poured out, each one laced with a fresh layer of agony. Sarah tried to explain, her words tumbling out over her sobs. I was scared, Mark. I was so scared. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want to raise him alone. The timing was so close, I just hoped. I wanted him to be yours so badly. You wanted him to be mine? Mark scoffed, a bitter, hollow laugh escaping him. You just let me pick up the pieces of your mistake and call them my own? You let me build my entire life, my entire identity as a father on a lie? His voice was rising, filled with a righteous indignation. Do you know what you've done? Do you have any idea? You've stolen 7 years from me, 7 years of my life, loving a child I thought was mine. You've stolen my trust, my peace, everything. I stepped in then, my voice calm but firm, cutting through the escalating emotional storm. Mark, sit down. We need to process this. Sarah, your fear doesn't negate the magnitude of the lie, but we need to understand the context. You kept this secret for a reason, however misguided. He reluctantly sat, glaring at Sarah, his eyes still burning. Context? What context is there for this? I looked at Sarah. You said the timing was close. You hoped, but deep down, Sarah, you knew, didn't you? You knew the probability was higher that he wasn't Mark's. She nodded, her head bowed. Yes, I had a feeling after he was born and I saw how much he looked like the other man. I couldn't face it. I couldn't destroy everything. Destroy everything? Mark repeated, incredulous. You just did. You just destroyed everything. This was the raw, unvarnished truth. The destruction was undeniable. But my goal wasn't just to let them wallow in the wreckage. It was to try and find a path through it. Mark, I said, drawing his attention back to me, I understand your anger. I understand your feeling of betrayal. It's absolutely justified. But there's another layer here. This boy, Leo, he knows nothing of this. He is an innocent child who loves his father, who believes you are his father. How does this affect him? That question seemed to pierce through his rage, hitting a different nerve. His shoulders slumped. He looked down at his hands, the fight draining from him, replaced by a profound sadness. Leo, he murmured, his voice cracking. He's my boy. He's always been my boy. The ownership in his voice was undeniable, biological or not. He was facing a betrayal from his wife, but the love for his son, a love that had grown organically for 7 years, was still fiercely present. That was the breakthrough I was looking for. The anchor point, yes, he is, I confirmed gently. And your love for him is real. His love for you is real. That relationship, those 7 years of memories, those aren't erased by a biological fact. They are forged in experience, in shared moments, in the daily act of fatherhood. This wasn't about excusing Sarah, but about salvaging what could be salvaged for Leo. Mark needed to understand that the child wasn't the lie. The child was real. The love was real. And that was something worth fighting for. Even in the midst of this catastrophe, this confrontation wasn't just about truth, but about the painful, messy, and often contradictory nature of love and family. The immediate aftermath of Sarah's confession was a maelstrom of emotions. Mark sat there, head in his hands, completely overwhelmed. The anger was still there, a simmering coal beneath the surface, but it was now laced with an unbearable sorrow. He kept muttering Leo's name, almost like a prayer. He wasn't just grieving the betrayal from his wife, he was grieving the loss of a foundational truth, a reality he had built his entire identity upon. He looked at Sarah with a look that wasn't just rage, but utter despair, as if she had ripped the very heart out of him and held it in her hand. Sarah, for her part, had moved past the initial explosion of confession into a quiet, desperate plea for understanding. Her tears still flowed, but her voice was steadier, laced with the exhaustion of carrying such a heavy burden for so long. She wasn't trying to excuse her actions, but to explain the paralyzing fear that had driven her. I know it was wrong, Mark. I know it was. Every single day. But I saw how much you loved him, how much you changed when he was born. I couldn't take that away from you. I know it sounds selfish, but I wanted him to have a father like you. I wanted our family to be whole. Her words were an attempt to reach him, to show him the twisted logic of her fear. But he was still too far gone in his own pain to hear them. My role now was to navigate this emotional minefield, to keep them from completely destroying each other, and to begin the arduous process of looking forward, however impossible that seemed in the moment. Sarah, I said, I hear your pain and I hear your fear, and I understand the impossible corner you felt you painted yourself into. But you have to understand, Mark's pain, his betrayal, is profound. You stole his right to choose. You stole his truth, and that has to be acknowledged fully and completely before any healing can begin. I then turned back to Mark, knowing he was the one who needed the most immediate grounding. Mark, you have every right to feel everything you're feeling right now. The anger, the devastation, the sense of betrayal, it's all valid. But I need you to separate two things in your mind right now, as difficult as it might be. There is your wife, Sarah, and the profound lie she has told. And then there is your son, Leo, who is an innocent party in all of this. Your love for Leo, that's real, isn't it? That bond, those 7 years of being his father, those are real experiences, real emotions. That's not a lie. He looked up at me then, his eyes still red and swollen, but with a spark of something familiar. He's my boy, Dr. Phil, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He calls me Daddy. He looks up to me. He's my world. The raw vulnerability in his voice was heartbreaking. It was the sound of a father's love, powerful enough to cut through the layers of betrayal. Yes, he is, I affirmed, and no biological fact changes that. The definition of a father isn't just DNA, it's presence, it's love, it's showing up every single day. And by every account I have, you have been a phenomenal father to Leo. You built that bond, he feels that love. That's a truth you can hold on to, Mark, even when everything else feels like it's crumbling. This was the pivotal point. It wasn't about absolving Sarah of her responsibility, but about giving Mark something to latch onto, something real and unwavering in the chaos. He needed to see that the child wasn't a weapon of deception, but a life that deserved his continued love and protection, regardless of the circumstances of his conception. The conversation then shifted to the practical, yet emotionally charged next steps. I asked Sarah about the biological father. She revealed he was an old colleague, someone she hadn't seen or spoken to in years. He was married, had his own family, and had no idea about Leo. This brought up a whole new layer of complexity and ethical dilemmas. Should he be told? What would be the impact on his family? What about Leo's right to know his full medical history? These were questions without easy answers. Questions that would require careful consideration and professional guidance. I also address the long-term impact on Mark and Sarah's marriage. Mark, you have a right to decide if you can ever forgive this, if you can ever rebuild trust after a lie of this magnitude. It will take an enormous amount of work, and there are no guarantees. But for Leo's sake, you both need to find a way to co-parent, to create a stable environment for him no matter what happens to your relationship. The conversation was brutal, honest, and stripped bare of all pretense. Sarah acknowledged her deep remorse and her willingness to do whatever it took to make amends, to earn back an ounce of Mark's trust, though she knew it was a monumental task. Mark, while still deeply hurt, began to slowly articulate a path forward for Leo. His initial impulse to completely cut Sarah out of his life, to sever all ties, started to yield to the overwhelming love he had for the child he still considered his son. The idea of punishing Sarah at Leo's expense was something he couldn't reconcile. The final segment of that show and the conversations that followed off air were about charting a path forward through the wreckage. There was no magic wand, no quick fix for a betrayal of this magnitude. What I aimed for, what I always aim for in these situations, is to establish a foundation for healing, even if that healing takes years. For Mark, the immediate priority was clarity. He needed proof. He needed a paternity test for Leo. He said it wasn't to disown Leo, but to simply know the absolute truth, to reconcile the biological facts with the emotional truth he held in his heart. Sarah readily agreed. There were no more secrets to be kept about this. I also emphasized to both of them the critical importance of therapy, individually and as a family, especially for Leo when the time was right. This secret had poisoned their lives for 7 years, and its revelation would create new wounds that needed professional attention to heal. Sarah needed to unpack the deep-seated fears and insecurities that led her to make such a destructive choice. Mark needed help processing the trauma of betrayal and figuring out how to navigate his love for Leo alongside his anger at Sarah. This was not something they could just get over or work through on their own. When they left my stage, they were two profoundly changed individuals. Sarah was raw, exposed, but also, for the first time in years, unburdened by the weight of the lie. The fear was still there. Fear of Mark's rejection, fear of losing her family, but it was mixed with a fragile sense of relief. Mark was devastated, clearly still in shock, but with a flicker of resolve. He knew he had a battle ahead, a battle for his own emotional well-being, but also a battle to protect the child he loved. Months later, my team followed up with them. The paternity test confirmed what Sarah had confessed. Leo was not Mark's biological son. This news, while confirming the lie, didn't diminish Mark's love for Leo. In fact, in a strange way, it solidified it. The abstract threat of not my son became a concrete fact, and with that fact came a strange clarity. He told us, it doesn't matter what a paper says, he's my boy, I raised him, I'm his dad. This was a powerful testament to the reality that fatherhood is forged in connection, not just conception. The decision about their marriage was a much harder, more protracted battle. Mark moved out temporarily. He needed space, time to grieve, to process the betrayal, and to decide if he could ever truly forgive Sarah. Sarah, for her part, committed fully to therapy, acknowledging the deep wounds within herself that led to her actions. She accepted Mark's need for space, for anger, for time. There were no grand pronouncements of reconciliation or divorce, just a painful, day-by-day struggle to figure out if there was any viable path forward for their relationship. They did, however, come to an agreement regarding Leo. Mark remained Leo's primary father figure, continuing all his roles: coach, confidant, bedtime storyteller. They were committed to shielding Leo from the adult complexities of the situation for as long as possible, and when the time was right, to tell him the truth in a way that prioritized his well-being and his relationship with Mark. The biological father was not contacted. Sarah and Mark agreed that introducing another variable into Leo's life at this stage would only cause more confusion and potential harm. Their focus remained squarely on Leo's stability and happiness. This story isn't one with a neat, tidy bow on top. It's not a Hollywood ending where everyone walks away hand in hand, all problems solved. That's not how real life works. The scars of such a profound deception would undoubtedly remain visible and invisible. Trust, once shattered, is incredibly difficult to piece back together. But what emerged from the rubble was a fiercely protective love for an innocent child. Mark's ability to separate his wife's betrayal from his son's inherent value was a testament to his character and the depth of his fatherly bond. My hope for them was that through continued therapy and an unwavering commitment to honesty, they might eventually find a new normal, whatever that might look like. Perhaps Mark and Sarah wouldn't stay married, but they would, through sheer force of will and a shared love for Leo, learn to co-parent effectively. And perhaps, with time, Mark could heal enough to build a new kind of trust, not naive, but informed, and based on the hard-won understanding of human fallibility. This case was a raw, unfiltered look at the devastating power of secrets and the enduring, complex nature of love and family in the face of absolute truth. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest act of love is choosing to stay, even when every fiber of your being tells you to run. And sometimes the hardest truth is the one that ultimately sets you free, not in the way you expect, but in the way you absolutely need.